Thank you very much, and also to Greg for his good introduction and some of the things he's raised about some of those dates of projects coming up. I think are well worth noting, and we'll do some things around those. First of all, about the New Zealand Commission, I'll just speak briefly. It was a New Zealand Labor Party initiative, Commission for the Future of Work, which ran for nearly 2 years, and it had hundreds of submissions and so on. I was an advisor to the Commission, and then also made a submission to it and spoke at their last conference. I have to say that the final report, which came out a couple of weeks ago, I didn't find very inspiring. As we do so often do in the labour movement, it was too motherhood and too general. It lacked some real specific policies that we should be raising. I think it could have been much more inspiring. As a matter of fact, arising from that, I have suggested to our Federal Shadow Minister in this field, Brendan O'Connor, that we develop a similar Commission on the Future of Work, but it not be just a passive thing where people present, but we actually use it to mobilise in workplaces and the like, so that workers themselves actually make submissions and actually talk about their working lives and give it a lot more oomph, if you like, particularly if we began it early next year and then led into the next federal election campaign. So we've already got something happening. I think too often we run conferences and commissions and they're too passive, and only the elites get to talk, when we should be making sure that it's deep down where all the stuff comes from. So I've made that suggestion to Brendan. Some weeks ago I got a positive response initially, but I won't follow it up until after the new year, given such a busy time. I haven't got a lot of time. Just very quickly on the question of the prediction of the future of work. There's a whole lot of ideas. I've read numerous books in recent times, and the final analysis, I think, is it's very difficult to predict the future, except that there does seem increasing evidence in the work that's been done up to now that where in the past technologies usually generated significantly more jobs in whole industries than existed previously, the technology is now so ubiquitous that the evidence would suggest that this is no longer the case. And one can't be hard and fast about that, but certainly the several books I've read lately, including this latest very fine book I must highly recommend, just out recently, Why the Future is Workless by Tim Dunlop, a Melbourne journo and an academic who I think should be asked to speak quite widely. But I think that's what's confronting us, and hence one of the things that he talks about extensively in there, and some of the best stuff I've yet read about the whole idea of a universal minimum income, which can be seen from both a right-wing reactionary perspective, but also be seen from another perspective about how freeing people of work opens up all sorts of other possibilities. Having said all that, the crunch issue will always be, as it has been in the past, the issue of power. The issue of power between the workers and capital, and I think it's becoming even more striking in this new world. One of the things, for example, which has featured so much in our industrial revolution has been the whole attack on skills, the taylorisation of work to minimum cycles, sometimes your seconds, with the employer having more and more control based on Taylorist principles from the top. And while there's potential to do away with that, so far the experience is it's only being reinforced in a lot of the new technological systems, what people have now described as digital Taylorism, where you just apply for a little job, even only a few minutes work, if you like, and although you might be highly skilled, you can only bid for a part of that job, and very often you don't get the job because the person who's making the decisions takes your ideas and gives them to somebody else who's on a lower wage. So the issue of who's controlling the whole thing is as critical as it's ever been. Although it'll be a bit more diverse, but in my experience that would suggest that issue will be quite central, as it always has been. I just want to, because I was also asked to refer to the role of unions in this new situation. I'm not very optimistic, to be perfectly honest, that unions, particularly in the Anglo-Celtic world, are equipped to deal with this. Compared with, say, unions in the Nordic and Germany are better equipped. Now, I'm not saying they're not under pressure and they're not being attacked, but one of the reasons is, and a very important reason, is that those countries have traditionally, the labour movements have traditionally made the issue of worker intervention, worker union intervention into management prerogatives a very important part of their strategy. Setting up consultative committees, changing work systems so you start to break down the Taylorism and give more power and skill to the workforce. And the whole issue then around quality of work has been quite important. And this then leads to you having, once we're confronted with these current challenges, about having a more significant say in it. A good example, for quite a few years now in Norway, we've had the program called Employee-Driven Innovation, a union initiative. And a dear friend of mine was directing that, Tony Kellervig, up until just a few months ago when he retired. And Tony used to explain it about, it's about dialogue with the employer, but it's what we often referred to as boxing and dancing. They dance with the employer when appropriate, but they've always got the strength to box when it's necessary. But the important thing about that initiative, where the unions and the workers got it underway and have had quite an impact on improving performance, it means, for example, when an enterprise is looking to improve its performance, the unions are so deeply involved in it that it's far less likely that those jobs are going to be contracted out or casualised, because we're there having a significant say. Whereas, unfortunately, in the Anglo-Saxon world, in my experience, in all my whole working life in the union movement here, the Australian unions, along with the British and Americans, for example, have paid very little attention to that. Everything's been based on the price, the wage, and even in one stage it was running with danger money rather than fixing up the problem. So we've got a culture that makes it very difficult. And I think the Australian movement, union movement in particular, is not very well equipped unless we're able to change the culture. And I have to say I found that almost impossible in all the years of trying to generate the idea that the unions would really back and lead the intervention of their members into management systems. Finally, well, two things. One, I think one of the things we badly need currently here, and I've been trying to do something behind the scenes in this, is an ongoing employer-union dialogue. And again, on the basis of boxing and dancing. By that I mean a low-level dialogue, starting informally with no commitments, where you start to look at the possible of agendas. The employers and unions get to talk around some issues, like the one that Greg's been describing, but getting something ongoing, like we did so well during the Accord years, where we were right up there in very constructive dialogue with the employers and the unions. I think we did quite well in a lot of that because we had a good agenda. And some union leaders say to me, but they won't talk to us, the employers won't talk to us. And my response is, of course they're not going to talk to you if you haven't got something to offer and you haven't got some strength to back it up. I think that's a critical necessity in the coming period. Finally, I just want to talk about this issue of cooperatives and how they've got to be brought much more to the fore in these struggles. It's a great pity in many ways that the labour movements, mostly around the world, but particularly again in the Anglo-Saxon world, pretty well put co-ops to one side and opted mainly for state ownership. And I think we lost a very important element of the whole progressive movement in that. There's some very interesting examples starting to emerge. In the US, there's been several very good examples where unions have gone in and organised workers in a couple of cases, drivers who were working for Uber, getting done in the eye as they do. The unions encouraging them and helping build a cooperative so they run their own operation. They join the union helps them and trains them to develop as the co-op. They get properly paid, and they then can set up and do it more successfully against the Ubers of this world. And there's been several other interesting examples. In the health field, there's quite a few. There's a very successful one where the unions played a major role in organising home care workers in upstate New York. And the workers went from $6 a week. The union organised them, all joined the union eventually, and now they're on $26 a week. And they've significantly increased the effectiveness of their service. So I think that that's got to be brought much more into the argument and development. And just in recent times, we've had policies now on unions and co-ops at the ACTU, at the Trades Hall Council, the most recent ALP State Conference and the National Conference. And we now have Andrew Lee, as part of his portfolio, is co-ops and their development. And now, it's not just any co-op. These have got to be co-ops where people who own them really do have power about how you run the business. And then you're talking about real challenge to power when you can develop those. Now, we've got a long, long way to go, but there's some things unfolding. Finally, I'll just draw your attention on that issue to an article which you might have seen in The Age on October the 15th, where at a big conference on co-ops, people like Stiglitz, Reich, Rivkin and co. all said that co-ops have got to play a big role in the future of the whole future of work systems, challenging globalisation as the only real way to get some democratic ownership and challenge. So there's no single answer to any of these issues about the future of work, but the co-op movement done properly with the unions in the foreground could play quite a significant role. Thank you.